Today was an event that culminated a year-long pilot project to implement complete streets in Baton Rouge.
It is a community issue because if you make streets safe for the older members of the family, then you've made them safe for everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm John Spain with the Baton Rouge Area Foundation and a member of the CPEX board, and I'm delighted to have you attend what may be one of the more interesting conversations we've had at this session, because our panelists today literally come from all over the country, and they're coming here to kind of pull back the curtain on the future and give us an idea of what future technology will have as an impact on the way we do transportation and how we get around our cities. And we're blessed to have three outstanding experts from various parts of the country with various backgrounds to share their ideas with us. I'll do brief introductions of each of them, and then each of them will come to the podium and they'll have a 10 or 12-minute presentation, and then we'll save some time at the end of those presentations for you to ask some questions. First on our panel is Jim Barbaresso, who's the Senior Vice President of the HNTB Corporation. Jim has more than 39 years of experience in transportation planning, traffic operations, and ITS, meaning Intelligent Transportation Systems, both in the public and private sectors. He now leads HNTB's ITS practice and provides subject matter expertise on highway and tolling projects across the United States. He's written numerous white papers and articles on public agency considerations regarding mobility solutions in our age of connectivity and automation. Next, we have Jeff Sauser, the Senior Urban Planner for Stantec's Urban Places. Jeff is an Associate Urban Designer at Stantec and a founding member of Stantec's Urban Places Group. In that role, he manages many of the group's largest, most complex urban planning, design, and redevelopment projects across North America. His work now focuses on creating compact, walkable, mixed-use redevelopment in transitioning neighborhoods and emerging communities in both the urban and suburban contexts. He's one of the firm's leaders in planning for the next generation of transformational urban opportunities and public benefits unlocked by automated vehicles. Seleta Reynolds is the General Manager of the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. She was appointed by the administration Mayor Eric Garcetti. She now is responsible for implementing Great Streets for Los Angeles, which is a plan to reduce traffic fatalities, double the number of people riding bikes, and expand access to integrated transportation choices for her city and the region. She has over 18 years of transportation experience throughout the United States. She's advised transportation technology companies like WalkScore, contributed to the state of the practice of the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals, and is a board member. She monitored young professionals through women's transportation seminars and nurtured research on transportation research board committees. She currently serves as the president of the National Association of City Transportation Officials. Please welcome all of our guests. Jim, if you would. As Jim comes to the podium, let me thank and recognize J.P. Morgan Chase for underwriting this session. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, John. You know, it's nice to get an applause before I speak. I come from Detroit, and then it's kind of like paying for your meal before you eat, you know, so thank you for that. Anyway, I want to talk about two of the fundamental building blocks of smart cities, and that's one, emerging mobility solutions, and two, big data. So when you think about emerging mobility, you're really thinking about four things: automated, connected, electric, and shared. That's the future of mobility in our country. And those are the types of technologies that will transform our cities in the future. And it could be they'll transform them in a rather unfortunate way if we let that happen. But we can't leave it to chance. We have to be deliberate, as Greg mentioned in one of the morning sessions today, and plan for the future so that that transformation is a good thing. But disruption also creates challenges for cities. We did a survey of practitioners from various cities around the country involved in emerging mobility programs, smart cities, and they identified a number of challenges. And what was interesting about this list of challenges is that they all have to do with data in one way or another. And if you look at it, I mean the format of the data regarding standards, data management, and that includes not only the collection of data, but the analysis of data to transform that data into information. And then there's also security of our networks and the security of our data, privacy. These are all critical issues and challenges that our cities face going forward in this age of connectivity and automation. And so what I want to do is talk a little bit about the opportunities that come out of this disruption and these challenges, and by first focusing on some of the best practices, one of which has to do with the evolution of decision support systems. And that means really using this data, but also processing speeds that have increased, the communications capabilities that we now have to help us make more and better informed decisions. And it's really all about smart decisions. That's what smart cities are about. And then we heard a session earlier today about open data. And open data is critical. And what is key to this is that it allows you to engage third parties, the private sector, and developers, the development community, which is really key to creating solutions that would offset maybe some of the costs that the city might undertake. And I'll give you a great example of this. 511 traveler information systems, for example, where now you can get real-time traveler information at your fingertips across modes. And this is all about traveler information also, and empowering users of the transportation network by giving them information where they need it and when they need it. And that's really key. We have all kinds of tools now available to us to do that. And then finally, managing your assets and making wise investment decisions. That's really key too for a city. And this is really important for cities of the future to understand what they have out there and how to leverage that to make investment decisions going forward. So, all of these opportunities actually are just the starting point for what I consider the vision of a smart city. And when you think about that, it's really about breaking down the silos, sharing information within the city, but also with other entities, governments, private sector, to help improve the quality of life within the community. And I give an example here of various mobile sources of data or from transportation systems around the city. But also, if you look here at the last column, it's about other departments or other entities outside the city potentially. And I'll give one example real quick, and that is the City of Columbus. I'm working on the City of Columbus, Smart Columbus program, and one of the key factors in them winning that $40 million federal grant was that they looked at, one, data with regard to infant mortality, and two, where their transportation systems were serving the public in a way that could maybe make give people opportunities to get health care. And what happened was they found this underserved community with one of the highest infant mortality rates in the country. Pregnant and young mothers could not get good health care because they had no access to transportation services. And so that's really key, is looking at data across the entire city and even outside the city to make informed decisions like that and to serve the public and provide those opportunities by providing information and also developing solutions that meet the needs of the community. And this is the value chain. If you look at this, it's really about breaking down those silos, taking that data across a communications network, in the case of Columbus, regional, and then integrating all that data together and providing actionable information. As I mentioned, it's about empowering the user, and that user might be the traveler, but it might be a city employee, and it might be a government or a business employee, somebody from outside government. This is the framework for Smart Columbus, and I just wanted to show this because really it's not about the technology, although there are 4 fundamental suites of technology that are used to deliver the Smart City program. The first being the Connected Transportation Network, which includes the fiber network, all the sensors out on the roadway, the bus systems, but then you have the integrated data exchange, which is really the platform for the Internet of Things. Enhanced human services, and this is really about having a common payment platform for all of your mobility options within the city, but also giving people the opportunity to access those mobility options. And then lastly, the electric vehicle infrastructure, and that includes charging stations, but also the hardened grid, because that's going to be critical in the future too. And of course, the outcomes of this, ladders of opportunity. That's what it's about, connecting citizens and residents with opportunities. So when it comes to Smart City, it's all about the data, but it's also about, and we heard it earlier, leadership, collaboration, being nimble, and also being proactive, because that's really key to having a smart city in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Skipped one. Building on Jim's foundation of, I think, the technical data piece, I'm an urban designer, urban planner. I work with developers, work with cities, and think about physical space, how people get around, and how that not just impacts the technology infrastructure and data, but also how we develop, how our societies evolve over time, how our cities develop, and a really exciting part of our history right now. So I'll skip some of the technical pieces that Jim kind of hit and jump to those other parts. Just generally that we're entering a mobility revolution, as everyone knows, around autonomous vehicles that, and this is a kind of overview of the technology, vehicles that can drive themselves, vehicles that can talk to other vehicles, vehicles that can talk to infrastructure. It's a much smarter environment, and this unlocks opportunities probably beyond what you might have thought. It's pretty astounding. And it's built on a really powerful network infrastructure. One of the most exciting pieces in our work is actually not just dealing with self-driving cars of the sort you might have seen with Uber, but shared autonomous vehicles. And this is sort of like a shuttle, and it looks innocent enough and not very impactful on its surface, but in reality, in the next 5 years, especially in dense urban cores like we're in right now, SAVs, shared autonomous vehicles or automated vehicles, could outcompete private cars in terms of cost because there's no driver, for example, convenience, they're on demand, and environmental impacts, they're electric. And you'd be surprised what these 3 ingredients can do to our cities in the future. So I'm going to now talk about some of the impacts that we see and allude to some strategies as kind of policymakers and change makers we can look to as we try to become leaders in this field and really try to get ahead of what this technology could do for us, turn impacts into benefits and not challenges. And I like to say that sort of like with a smartphone innovation, where at first it was just a smartphone and now it's changed everything, if it's conceivable, it's inevitable. And that seems to be the case in many ways around autonomous vehicles and related technologies. So for example, from a development and planning standpoint, all of a sudden every development is a TOD. Traditionally, you think about TOD as a quarter-mile walk around a transit station. Well, now you can get 2 miles just as fast as you could have walked a quarter mile. Or you don't even need a transit district. That's something that's makes some people nervous. Maybe in smaller communities you can create transit level service for a smaller place without having to build big infrastructure here. So it unlocks opportunities for places that can't afford a new streetcar. One of the most exciting and interesting impacts here is just what's going to happen to parking and what isn't going to happen to parking. It won't need to be built so much anymore. And we can plan for this in our policies now, anticipating this future. A lot of our developer clients are trying to find ways to integrate this technology now so they don't have to build that 50 million parking garage today when they know they're not going to need it tomorrow. And as parking demand goes down, parking is one of the most expensive parts of a redevelopment project, especially in a big city, downtown, structured parking, underground parking. If developers aren't spending money on that anymore, they can spend that money. They'll probably put some of it in their pocket, but they can save some of it for creating affordable housing, for creating better public benefits. It's up to us as leaders in the community, policymakers, to help capture some of that new value that's been unlocked and convey it to the public and not just to the developers' bank accounts. This is something that's still sorting itself out, I think. I mean, one thing we know is that vehicles will need a lot less space. We might not need less lanes. The roads are going to get pretty busy. And they're not going to necessarily get any calmer, but these cars and vehicles can drive much more closely together horizontally and in line. So we can start to redistribute especially in urban situations, redistribute the right-of-way, give more to the pedestrian, give more to the bikes, and take away from the cars without impeding traffic potentially and capacity. The interface between streets and buildings is going to get very busy. It already is busy. It's going to get even busier because fewer people are going to be going to that one driveway. They're going to be jumping in and out of cars. Deliveries will be happening all over the place. Robots will be all over. We're going to need to really understand how to reorganize the curb edge. And now it's surface parking or loading zones. It's going to need to either get a lot more hierarchical and segmented or a lot more choreographed. It's going to be very interesting. Roads, too, as warehouses. It's not hard to imagine Amazon offering 5-minute delivery service where they have trucks loaded up with all the normal goods people tend to order, and they just drive around the city, trolling around, waiting for someone to order toilet paper so they can get it to them in 5 minutes. Well, meanwhile, they're taking up space on roads that we would otherwise be using to get ourselves around. So that's something that needs to be managed. And infrastructure. That's something that you can get ahead of right now. We sort of know what's necessary. There's fiber optics and other things that you could start piggybacking on capital projects you're doing right now, so you're prepared to move quicker when the autonomous vehicles really hit the ground. And my favorite thought is to start imagining how this is going to spread into other domains. It's not just between the curb lines, it's the sidewalks. This is a little guy that delivers groceries, and right now, if you try to break into it, it just starts screaming. That's the security feature right now. But clearly, it's going to get a lot more sophisticated, a lot more interesting. They're going to start going inside of people's buildings. They're going to start flying around. This is boats in Copenhagen. MIT is testing these. They can take people up and down the canals. They can also create a temporary bridge by locking themselves together, sort of like ants. It just gets real exciting as you start to think about it. More broadly, CAVs is kind of a blanket term for connected automated vehicles. So it's shared, it's other, it kind of is the whole gamut. It's one of in our parlance anyway, how we refer to things. We can imagine a healthier lifestyle in the future that makes it easier to live without a car. You might be in vehicles a lot, but you also it's easier to do a lot more walking. Electric vehicles clean the air. And by not having a car, which costs $5,000 to $10,000 or more $1,000 a year for a lot of people, suddenly people have a lot more money in their pockets. It can promote equity. And this is a challenge in a lot of communities around the country. As people don't need gasoline anymore, how are they going to generate revenues that were typically derived from transportation? And because the streets are going to be so smart, we can know where everybody is, how long they're there. We know that Amazon truck has been on that road for 75 hours straight without stopping, and we can charge them for that time spent on the road. So we can think of the road as an asset that can be built just like it was before, but in a much more direct and deliberate way that can be equitable. You can charge the people who use it more, and maybe commercial more than just regular citizens. A lot of interesting ethical dilemmas are coming to the fore. Germany's actually ahead of this. You're going to have to program into these machines decision-making that we never thought we'd have to actually confront. They're kind of thought experiments from philosophy class that now you have to write code for about which person do you not run into versus another person. Again, there aren't any rules about this thing. I don't have a whole lot of answers. These are mostly questions, as I was talking about before. These are just the things we're going to start confronting, and they're revealing themselves to us pretty quickly. data, we know about that, and security issues, privacy issues. That data is worth a lot of money to somebody potentially. So that's a question: is it open source or is it not open source? And if not open source, who should control it and get that value, and who shouldn't? And then this is in my opinion, this is kind of a perennial question. It's kind of endemic to the nature of capitalism. We've been living with this for a long time: job churn, job loss. So again, with a disruptive technology, we're going to see a lot more job churn. On a certain level, it's healthy, but on another level, we need to make sure we can manage it so it's not too disruptive to the individual people whose livelihoods are being upended. And then to an economic development standpoint, there's a lot of jobs that will be created in this technology revolution, and communities should be able to, should strive through their leadership to attract those jobs to their communities, to become the first pilot community that embraces this technology as opposed to pushing it away, so that those jobs that get created will come to your community, to Louisiana, for example, Baton Rouge. So when do you need to start planning? And as Jim already said, you need to have started planning already, or if not then, how about today? Because from my perspective, working with developers and people who invest in the urban environment, it's going to cost a lot more in the future to catch up to the times. So on the left side, you see conventional development as time goes on and automated vehicles kind of emerge. If you build that giant parking garage day one, it's going to be a lot harder to replace it later in a cost-effective way. Whereas if you maybe start with a surface parking lot, even though that's kind of counterintuitive these days, you're banking that land so you can build something much denser later, knowing that you're not going to need that parking today. So really intelligent approaches to parking, and then the public realm is the same way. As you're ripping up streets, design them in a way that anticipates how streets are going to operate in the future, to the extent you can predict it. So what should cities and communities do? Participate, be a part of the conversation, take steps, even baby steps are good, and build public confidence and excitement about it, and not fear. So for example, some of those baby steps could be working towards legislation, which is really moving quickly actually at state and federal levels. Start to get some of that infrastructure in there, plan for it, communicate. Get vehicles on the road through pilot projects, get people interacting with them so they're not an idea to fear, but something to actually ride around in and demonstrate that they are safe. One important decision is to, as you implement these things, consider the pros and cons of a public versus private public-private partnership as you structure your pilot programs and as you start to integrate this technology into transit systems or development projects. Each has its benefits and challenges, so just give it a good thought. And then something we're working with a lot of communities on is just launch a pilot. It really isn't that, it's a lot less complicated than you might think. It's something that can be done right away. There are a lot of people, a lot of manufacturers rolling these things out. And the process looks complicated, but it can be done pretty rapidly. And places like Las Vegas are already expanding their pilot program into a subsequent phase. And interestingly, the two little dots are actually big, important dots, legislation and regulation. But if certain types of stakeholders, certain types of people can kind of sidestep those. So for example, a university that owns all its land isn't necessarily subject to some of the regulations governing public streets and can kind of get ahead of the game, or a corporate office user, for example. They own their streets, so the laws are a little different. So those might be good places to pilot things, work with an institute like that, just to get the ball rolling as things on the public side catch up. Thank you.
All right, PowerPoint home stretch, y'all. Again, my name is Seleta Reynolds. I run the Department of Transportation for the City of Los Angeles. We are responsible for managing and operating about 7,500 miles of streets, 37,000 parking meters, 4,500 signals, $200 million of parking revenue between citations and meters every year, and we run a transit service on top of that. So we are right in the middle of these conversations about what cities should be doing and thinking about, because I think that there's a really important takeaway in the previous two discussions, which is that this is not about technology, it is about public policy. It's not about computers. It is about people in our cities and making sure that technology serves the city and not the other way around. Because we made that mistake 50, 60 years ago when we ripped out all of our cable cars and really built this kind of infrastructure that we're now stuck with that we can't maintain for the internal combustion engine. We have an opportunity to flip that on its head if we get it right. So people ask me a lot of times what I do I care about at LADOT. It's really these three big buckets. It's about building safe, beautiful streets. It's about being a 21st century Department of Transportation, which is not just about infrastructure. It's about managing people's mobility and really making my department a great place to work. And equity is really across all three of these buckets, and it is not something that sits on top of these agendas. Equity is the agenda. And when I say equity, I mean very intentionally racial and socioeconomic equity in the city of Los Angeles. So just a quick beat on safety. We have a goal in Los Angeles to get to 0 traffic deaths by 2025. Traffic crash is the #1 cause of death for kids under 14 in LA County. And those deaths are deaths that we think of as preventable through systems design because about 94% of them are caused by human choice or error. So as we look into the future, there's obviously a big opportunity to turn that story around if we are removing the human from the loop. However, the transition is going to suck. Because as companies endeavor to put more and more technology inside the vehicle, we're actually seeing severe and fatal crashes move in the opposite direction, highest level in the last 50 years, because the amount of technology in your car makes distracted driving a given. And we're struggling with that. But the other thing that we think quite a bit about in LA is really the fact that we are now the least affordable city in the United States if you compare the cost of housing to prevailing wages. And if we want to save the things about the city that we love, its diversity, its hospitality, its thriving creative heart, then we cannot afford to push out people who live there now. You can reach about 12 times as many jobs in an hour by car in Los Angeles as you can in an hour on public transit. And for the third of people who are zero vehicle households in and around downtown, that puts a hard cap on their opportunity. It literally steals time that they could be spending with their families and perpetuates a cycle of poverty that goes down through generations. That is transportation's promise, that it can be the connective tissue that really pulls people together, that doesn't just ladder to opportunity, but that makes place. But for too long, it's been the thing that holds communities apart and holds people down. So as we think about opportunities in the future, this is an animation that I go home and watch after a tough day at work. This is a map of the build-out of the Los Angeles light rail system that was possible before the passage of Measure M, a major sales tax measure that passed by over 70% of the popular vote in LA County last year, and then the robust build-out of what we'll be able to do now thanks to the voters' faith in our ability to build it out. And it's pretty good. Right? I mean, it's pretty comprehensive. It looks like a legit city with a real transit system, and hopefully we can finally put to bed that notion that you can't take transit to get around Los Angeles. But this is Uber's coverage. After being in Los Angeles for for just a couple of years, really a year and a half, right? And it's dominant, and it touches all parts of the county. And no matter how fast we build out that light rail system, and we will build it, we will never reach this many people. And because Uber and Lyft have been very stingy with their data, we really didn't have any idea who was using this or how it was changing people's lives and the way they got around the city. So lucky for us, UC Davis came out with a study a couple weeks ago from about 6 American cities, including Los Angeles. And what they said in that study, looking at the data, is what we've been saying all along, which is that the people who can afford to use these services are typically very wealthy, very well-educated, young, white, and urban, right? And that those trips are not coming out of taxis. They're coming off public transit, light rail, biking, and walking, and some single-occupant vehicle. So I'm not sure that looking at programs and providers like this as a panacea is necessarily the right way for us to move forward. In California, the state regulates Uber and Lyft. Cities have no ability whatsoever to get data, price trips, control driver safety, anything like that. And learning these lessons is absolutely critical because of what's coming next. And as we think about, all of the things that I discussed, the safety opportunities, the space opportunities, if we can reduce the fleet of vehicles on the road, the potential to manage and ease congestion, these are big challenges that reach into areas way beyond transportation in terms of making people's lives better. And they really allow us to dream a little bit. If we can get to a connected, shared, electric, autonomous fleet of vehicles and actually shrink the number of cars that we need to move the same number of people around Los Angeles, we might be able to maintain the infrastructure that we have. We might be able to stop trying to build our way out of congestion. 200 square miles in Los Angeles devoted to parking, devoted to storing dormant private vehicles that are not in use about 85 to 90% of the day. However, as I mentioned, I both oversee meters and I also oversee parking tickets. Apologies if you've ever visited Los Angeles and gotten a parking ticket. But those two things together amount to $200 million of revenue on an annual basis that goes into the city's general fund. And that money doesn't fund transportation. It funds cops and firefighters and libraries and city services. So if the need for parking is either diminished or disappears, what are the new financial models that we're going to have to contemplate in order to maintain those services? Because if robots don't break rules, then we don't write parking tickets anymore. And if robots don't need to park because they're circulating around and doing e-commerce or whatever else they're doing all day, then we've got something that we need to think about. But it is more likely that we're going to get it wrong, because when you drop autonomous vehicles into a normal model that we in transportation use to forecast the future, they actually explode congestion. They increase by orders of magnitude the numbers of long trips that people are taking. They re-incentivize suburban sprawl, because if you can wake up at 3 in the morning, push a button, and a robo-taxi comes and picks you up, and it's got a bed in it, and it's got 5 other commuters sleeping in it at the same time, and it can sit in traffic for you for 3 hours every day, and then in the afternoon you push another button and another robo-taxi comes and picks you up, and you can watch a movie and you can work on your laptop and you can have a lot of found time, then there's a lot more congestion and trips that people are going to be making. So there are real questions here. Waymo just announced this morning that they are ready with a fully driverless vehicle to put it out on the streets and to start doing ride-hailing services in Phoenix in the near future. This is not something that is 5, 10, 50 years away. This is something that's important for us to think about right now. So we put together this document, Urban Mobility in a Digital Age. It's our transportation technology strategy. We had an architect come in and be a fellow for a year at LADOT. We released this last October to really give ourselves a roadmap. What is the role of the private sector? What is the role of government in making sure that we can nudge these things in the direction that aligns with our values and our city policies? So we've got 5 buckets. One is about data, absolutely foundational. Number 2 is about changing the way we think about transportation from just being about the system to being about the user. And because we're from the West Coast, we couldn't call it user experience. We call it transportation happiness. So that's number 2. Number 3 is about partnerships. I don't need to own and operate the public transit fleet of the future, because I want it to have bike share, car share, jitneys, driverless buses, all of those things. But I do need to convene all of those private providers to make sure that they go to South LA and they go to Boyle Heights and they go to Pacoima the same way that they're going to go to Century City and Venice on the west side. The last 2 are really about how we can think about the street of the future and how we can prepare for a fully autonomous transit fleet. So data as a service is one of these buzzwords that you'll hear a lot. We have, as a sort of a first step, a data sharing agreement with Waze. Waze is in 1 in 4 cars in LA County. We get their data. It makes our traffic management system better. They get our data, and it means that the drivers using those vehicles are sort of pushed away from all of the street closures that happen in Los Angeles on a regular basis. So we make their algorithm smarter, we make our street closures safer, and we get our traffic management system to work better. Mobility as a service is this idea that at the touch of a button, you could say, I want to go from downtown LA to University of Southern California, and in the palm of your hand, it would say, great, do you want to go sooner, cheaper, or greener? How many calories do you want to burn? How much money do you want to spend? And then you could say, okay, jump on a bike share bike, go get on the red line, and then get in a car share car, an EV car sharing car, and all of that is booked and paid for in one step to make the right choice easy. Infrastructure as a service is this idea. It is the idea that we should price access to the roadway the way we price access to other kinds of infrastructure, that you should pay it as you use it. So you can imagine an optimized network of streets that works really well for autonomous vehicles, that maybe costs you more to use if you are by yourself in your Tesla taxi, and maybe costs less if you are sharing a ride, carpooling, or in a bus. And furthermore, that if we can communicate with the fleet of vehicles with a single sort of flip of a switch, that it makes it easier to close streets for things like block parties and other projects that we have. So we're starting to play around with this idea of temporary infrastructure and changeable spaces. Why does a street have to be the same thing 24 hours a day? Why can't we play with it a little bit more using temporary materials and leverage the technology and communication to give streets back to communities? So this is this is the Vision Theater in Lemert Park in South LA. This is part of our People Street program, so we ask communities to tell us where there is underused infrastructure. And we come in and we put in some very light touch, cheap, quick and dirty treatments. Sorry, the professional term for that is cost-effective treatments. And the community comes and programs it. And this space has not been empty since we opened it, because there was latent demand for places for people to gather and convene in this community, places that were safe and welcoming and that were owned by the community, right? Not owned by government, but owned by the community. So imagine if, in the morning, this is a street, and then in the afternoon, the bollards come up, the mats come out, and it can be a playground. It can be an outdoor movie theater. It can be whatever you need it to be. That's the promise of technology that we really are thinking quite a bit about. We're also thinking about something we call mobility hubs. So I talked about mobility as a service. We know what that might look like on your smartphone. What does it look like in the city? So we're going to build 13 of these. This is where we pull together bike share, green taxis, EV car sharing, and we treat people with hospitality, and we thank them for making these choices. We give them a place to sit with some shade. We give them information. We give them Wi-Fi. We let them charge their devices. We give their kids games to play, right? This is sort of the neighborhood hub. It becomes a place that you can gather, and it just happens to be about transportation. And we're doing these in some of our most impacted low-income neighborhoods around the city. So this is Westlake, around MacArthur Park in Los Angeles. It's our first promise zone, and it's where we're doing a ton of layering and testing of this new technology. Because what we're doing in Los Angeles is trying to identify what we call proving grounds. So we're not trying to build a fake city. We think other places have done that better for people to test their technology. But when you're ready to come and play in a live environment, these are the places we've identified where autonomous connected vehicles, any kind of technology, airborne technology, unmanned aircraft, all of those things can happen. And we've brought together folks from every layer of government, except the feds, for obvious reasons, in order to make it a one-stop shop, in order to streamline things and make it easy for people to come and test and deploy and pilot in Los Angeles, depending on what you're really ready for. We've also mapped out all of the people who knock on my door on almost a daily basis, right? I have over 100 different companies that are coming to LA and asking if they can hang things on my signal poles, if they can do things to my meters, if they can give me a hoverboard sharing fleet. Promise that happened. And I need to be able to make sense of that chaos to make good decisions. So we look at whether or not it aligns with our plans. We understand what the private sector is asking from us, and we make decisions about where to spend limited resources, because our cities are not going to tomorrow, lucky for Columbus, the rest of us are not going to get $40 million to grow sort of civic infrastructure to get ready for this. So we have to figure out a way to be ruthless with our time. And then we put together this wheel, which is about how we're going to iteratively test and all of the different things that we're thinking about, including community engagement and partnership development, but labor preparation. What is the job description of the driver of the future? I oversee taxis in Los Angeles. Just a few weeks ago, well, actually a few months ago, we got rid of our driver exam, which was basically an English proficiency exam. And almost overnight, we increased the number of taxi drivers in Los Angeles by 30% because we replaced it with customer service training. We've got more women coming in the door. And after about 36 months of decline, now the taxi industry has more drivers and better prepared labor force to sort of deliver those services. So I think there are places where we can influence that. So again, you can feel free to just find and replace from our transportation technology strategy. That's what it's there for, is really meant to be a sort of an opportunity for cities to start thinking about these things as we tried to do some hard work. NACTO also released just last week a blueprint for autonomous urbanism, which does the same thing, goes through some basic principles, some thinking about the street of the future, and a lot of conversation about data. It's there as a resource so that cities can really pull up a seat at the table. Thank you.
There is a microphone right down here in the front right that Rachel could bring to you. If you have questions, just raise your hand. We've certainly given you 3 very dynamic presentations that should be generating some questions about where we are as a city and what we can learn from some of the others. Yes, sir.
The presentations were, as you said, the presentations were great. They're exciting, too. They're thrilling, especially for someone who has watched the Jetsons and Star Wars and various movies and fantasies. For someone who is disabled, they're also exciting. Mobility is one of the greatest problems that I have since I can't see. And that is exciting to know that there will be autonomous cars and buses and that type of stuff. However, it's also very horrifying. First of all the noises that electric cars do not make, and that whatever technique that you use in the future, we can't hear. And so we don't know what's coming at us. In terms of the getting around the streets, these will be great. Once I get off the curb and walk towards the door, what in the world is going to be running around my legs that I can't see and I can't hear, and my dog most probably will be horrified of? I guess what I'm saying to you is, it's exciting, but there's one section that's been left out. What do you do with those people who get older, those people who are disabled and can't hear electric cars and can't see things running around all over the place and have to find their way or else depend on other people, which requires a lot of money? So it's exciting. I'm thrilled by the automation. I'd love to get an automatic car tomorrow. I'm not sure many of you would like me to have that, but anyway, but it's horrifying, absolutely horrifying. You think I'm scared to go in the street now? Just wait until that happens.
Jim, you want to start?
Certainly, vehicle automation is going to be a benefit, a huge benefit to the disabled community. And you're right, it's going to be difficult for the blind to, for example, to see, but also, to hear now. Electric vehicles, they don't make much noise. You're absolutely correct. One of the things we're doing in Tampa under the connected vehicle pilot there is we are developing an application because Tampa has one of the highest fatality rates for pedestrians in the United States. And it's because of the mix of traffic in the downtown area with streetcars, buses, cars coming off the Selman Expressway onto the arterial network in the middle of a highly urbanized and very pedestrian-oriented environment. And as a result, a lot of crashes with pedestrians. So we're developing an application for a connected pedestrian. And what that application will do is warn the pedestrians that a vehicle is approaching and also warn the drivers of those vehicles that a pedestrian is in its path, basically a target. So we have the solution for solving part of that situation by offering connectivity services for people with some sort of physical impairment, and that's really key.
So I just think we have to do better than that. I don't think it is acceptable to think that the onus should be on every pedestrian to have a smartphone with an app on it, right? And that is the best that there is out there right now. That is the solution, that we're all going to have to wear sensors when we're not in a vehicle, because electric vehicles are problematic for a whole spectrum of people. When I ride my bike from my house to work and there's an EV behind me, I don't hear it until the very last minute, and that creates a lot of conflicts. And I don't think there's been enough consideration for how these things are going to operate in cities where there are lots of people biking and walking, lots of people taking transit. Not everybody has a smartphone. Not everybody's going to be downloading an app in order to get around. And if you look at the federal legislation, which is making its way through the Senate right now, it allows manufacturers to deploy up to 100,000 autonomous vehicles every year. That's not just testing. That's deployment. That ends up being 1% of the fleet of vehicles that is on the street, and nobody knows how to pull one of these things over. Just let that sit for a minute.
RoboCop.
Right? That nobody knows no law enforcement agency has figured out how to pull one of these things over. They haven't really solved the pedestrian and bicycle detection challenge, but they're going to be allowed to put, hundreds of thousands of these out on our city streets. So I do think it is important for us to be making a space for this discussion. Because it hasn't happened in a meaningful way. There's been such an arms race for the technology that we haven't really gotten down to some of the things that are going to keep these things from being accepted, from being publicly accepted.
I think that we should distinguish between EVs and AVs to some extent. I think everything that has been said is exactly right. I also think, though, that AVs will be able to see better than most people will. So while the pedestrian might be at a disadvantage, especially a disabled pedestrian, hopefully the cars have more data to process and can avoid bikes and pedestrians when they're fully automated. That said, we've heard about situations where these vehicles encounter new scenarios. For example, a plastic bag was one that a car just didn't know what to do with. So I think there is reason to be concerned about it, but also I think reason to be confident that many of the problems could get figured out. One other impact I wanted to talk about related to disabled and also elderly communities is the power that automated vehicles have to expand paratransit service, especially in small communities, rural communities where there's just no way they can serve to an adequate level of service elderly communities. I actually live in a small town with the most rural part of Massachusetts, in fact, and there's a couple of vans that need to serve hundreds and hundreds of people all over the place. And that's because the cost of those vans is so high to pay the driver, to pay for certain types of insurance. If you could double that fleet for the same money or triple the fleet for the same money, you can really start to impact these people's lives and allow them to participate in daily life and not have to rely on a bus that only comes by twice a day, or a van you have to call 6 hours in advance to ride. And I think the same could be true not just for elderly, but for people with physical disabilities, sight disabilities. They, if done right, if executed properly, can hopefully enjoy a much enhanced level of mobility in the future.
So we've got about 5 minutes left, so we'll take some quick questions if you got them, please. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I was reading an article the other day, and the prediction was that 30% of the vehicles in 2030 would be autonomous vehicles. But that also means 70% are still standard driver vehicles. I'm sure there's some people here that were around when horse and buggy and cars started to, transition from one to the other. But I'm glad the research you guys are doing and other things, but there's a lot of things we're going to have to work out, especially in that transition time when you have both types of vehicles still on the road.
Other questions? Is there a question that you want to respond to, Jim? The transition from the old current to the new and how we're going to make that work together?
Yeah, I could respond at least if we're talking about the transition period. There's probably about 20 years, 30 years before we move into a fully automated vehicle environment. And if during that time, it's going to be very challenging for transportation operations and for the operators of those vehicles. And that includes either personal vehicles, but also fleet-owned vehicles. But I see there being a need in some instances to separate the automated vehicles from the rest of the fleet. I always say automated vehicles are very polite. I've been in a number of them, and they always obey traffic laws, and human drivers don't. And frankly, that in very many cases is the cause of some of the vehicle crashes that we've heard about from between automated vehicles and other types of vehicles. But for example, on freeway segments, how hard would it be to transform one lane of a freeway into an automated vehicle lane that would allow platooning of vehicles within that lane that could travel at higher speeds with shorter headways? You could increase the capacity of that lane by probably 100%, but also increase the overall capacity of the facility by doing that, because some of the vehicles will migrate to that particular lane in the future. So you increase overall capacity, and as the fleet grows of automated vehicles, then you can add lanes until you get to the point where now you have 3 lanes that are automated vehicle lanes versus 1 lane, say, for general purpose, and before you know it, we get rid of that too. And who knows, you might have to go to like a grown-up go-kart track to drive an actual vehicle in the future. So anyway, it's going to be a challenging 30 years ahead of us from that perspective, and especially from a transportation operations perspective. But it's going to be a lot of fun too.
We've got no more time.